Hello, everyone. Simon Jacobson here. Our hearts, our souls, our prayers are with our brothers and sisters in the Holy Land, all innocent men, women, and children, following the horrible massacre that took place on October 7th, a little more than 2 weeks and 1 day ago. So we're in the third week of this war. So we titled this program Update from the Spiritual Warfront, Week 2. This program is dedicated by Lori Good in memory of the martyrs of the Israeli massacre. May their memory be a blessing. These are hard times for all of us, for every civil person, every decent human being. They don't come that often, thank God. But in many ways, we will be judged by how we behave today. Now, that cliche, you're either part of the problem or part of the solution, couldn't be more fitting than today. It's not a time to be on the sidelines. It's a time to enlist ourselves in a battle. Now, I know I'm speaking as a Jew, someone who loves Israel, who prays 3 times a day toward the promised land. But I'll be honest, for me, I cry for any innocent person killed, and especially in such barbaric manner. So there are times in history where we do have good and evil, and light and darkness, and we need to know how to address it. Yes, I understand there's always 2 sides to a story, and you can justify, but certain lines should never, ever be crossed. I, for one, can tell you right now that if anyone ever entered into a civilian city and massacred in the same way men, women, and children, whether it was in Cambodia or in Gaza or in Moscow or in Paris, wherever you like, for me it would be exactly the same tragedy. Obviously, this is closer to home. It's my own family. But the fact of the matter is that we have to stand up. And as I've been doing since the moment that this war broke out, just as we have a physical war front, there has to be a spiritual war front. So I want to give an update from the war front, at least from the vantage point and perspective that I see. And where's that vantage point? Number one is my own take on the events taking place, but more importantly, what I'm hearing from people. I probably have received, thousands of questions, comments. People are so still confused and shocked. What's going to be, where is this going, and so on. So I don't have the answers to all the questions. However, one thing is definite, that we need to maintain a tremendous resolve in our moral clarity, a tremendous element of our humanity. I was asked the other day, what do I do with my fury when I see some of those images? I don't want to even describe the graphic elements of how children in front of their parents and parents in front of their children, you can fill in the blanks. I get furious. I want revenge. I want the blood of these enemies. What do you say? So I say, I will not invalidate any person's feelings of that nature. My blood boils as well, especially if it was my own family. The fact that it's not my own very biological family doesn't make it less of a challenge. The same thing when you see the images from Nazi Europe. But I said, at the end of the day, what I have learned and what I know, and why the Jewish people are still here after thousands of years of going through such persecutions, is that we do not become victims to our enemies where we become haters like them. Yes, we look at it in the eye, the evil, and we'll address it, and we'll eradicate and cut the serpent off at its head. That's what you do in times like this. But that still does not define us. We're not warriors. We're not fighters. We don't like blood. We don't like death. You have to do what's necessary. Simple self-defense. What we need to do is take all that fury and that anger and channel it to a tremendous spiritual revolution. Because we have an objective. We came to this world not just to fight evil. We came to this world to bring good into the world. And we recognize that our passion for light, for love, for life, is much more powerful than their passion for death and suffering and darkness and evil. That's ultimately who we are. So if anything, that darkness only intensifies our drive, like every form of resistance, to be even more committed. But while we have to do is also cut out the cancer. Should have been done a long time ago. So my general update from the spiritual front is that I've seen unbelievable beauty and unity and love and unprecedented outpouring of support. Even people who come from very different schools of thought just a few weeks ago were arguing, have joined together. That is the testimony to what it really means to be human, to be divine, frankly. You know, things like this sometimes create tremendous divisiveness. People are here to save their own skin. You see throughout history what happens. People in crisis suddenly become very selfish, to do whatever they can do to protect themselves at the expense of others. And here on the contrary, people ready to sacrifice themselves, number one, simply they know their lives are on their line, but to protect and defend innocence. Going into enemy territory to try to retrieve and find the hostages, to try to eradicate any form of the evil wherever it originates from. The unity coming in the amounts of money and supplies and resources. So from the spiritual front, there's some very tremendous, powerful signs. Because when you see that, you see the morale. Remember, a military, an army, is only as powerful as its psychological state of mind. You could have all the firepower in the world, but if you feel demoralized and fearful and weak, you're not going to win. So it's critical to have that form of unity, that form of drive, commitment. And yes, there is a moral clarity here. Despite our disagreements, you can absolutely disagree with somebody, but there's a line that no one should ever cross. No one plays God in killing innocent, targeting innocent men, women, and children. That's exactly what the Nazis did. And we all know how abhorrent it is. So that's a general report from the front lines. The second is, yes, there's a lot of questions about fear. Will we again just give in to the pressure of political interests, financial interests? What do you do with fear? So here again, I'd like to report that I've seen in so many digging deeper and finding spiritual resources that you don't always find in regular times. Do we need more of it? Absolutely. And that's where I call to you and I call to myself, a call to arms, spiritual arms, that whoever you know, don't hesitate, reach out, share a kind word, share an optimistic word. Yes, we understand there are challenges, but still we forge ahead. And yes, we will be looking back at this time in history and say, how did you act? And our children look at us. Where do you think children pick up fear from? Panic from their parents, from their adults. So we have to be honest that there are challenges, but we shall prevail. We shall prevail because the spiritual power of our weapons is more powerful than any physical weapon. While at the same time, we obviously have to use those as well in this world to protect ourselves and defend against any form of attack and so on. A third report. And I'll just share my own personal, I gained tremendous strength when I look back in history and I see how our ancestors and our predecessors, how they dealt with situations like this, or worse or better. I don't want to compare tragedies, obviously. So I was reading in this week's chapter in the Bible. We begin this third week of this war. And I just want to read to you a few verses. I found them to be literally, if you did not know better, you'd think they were written today. So I'm reading an English translation from Genesis, chapter 15, verse 1 through 21. Not reading all the verses, just a few verses. So we're talking about the story of Abraham, 3,800 years ago. And where is Abraham now? He's entered into the promised land, which would soon be promised to him. He traveled from where? From Ur Kasdim, which was more or less today's modern day southeastern Iraq, traveled north and west, and came to Canaan, to the land that God led him to. So number one, you have the story of the origins of the promises. The first time Israel is really mentioned. Remember, Adam and Eve and the civilization was centered more in the Mesopotamian valleys that were more like southeastern Iraq, modern day southeastern Iraq, later known Babylon, that area. So now Abraham travels to Israel. So it's interesting to know what happened. So it says God's word comes to Abraham in a vision, saying, "Fear not, Abraham." His name was still Abraham, not Abraham. Fear not. Why should he be afraid? Because clearly he was a wise man. He understood that this is going to be a hotbed. I am your shield, says God. Your shield. Interesting word. Shield is a word used in the military. I'm your protection. Your reward is very great. Do remember that earlier in this week's chapter, it also says, those that bless you shall be blessed, and also the opposite. Okay. Continuing, Abraham says, "Oh God, what will you give me if I remain childless? These blessings are all great, but if I remain childless, it all ends right here and now." And remember, his children were not born yet, not Ishmael from Hagar, and not Isaac from Sarah. God continues. Suddenly, God's word came to him. One born from your own body will inherit what is yours. And here's what God tells Abraham. Listen to this. He then took him outside. God takes Abraham outside and says, "Look at the sky and count the stars. See if you can count them. That is how numerous your descendants will be." Abraham believed in God and he counted it as righteousness. I look at myself, I am a child of Abraham, unbroken chain, as are millions of my own brothers and sisters. Then it was a promise. Abraham needed faith. Today we don't need a promise, we don't need faith. The promise was delivered. We're here today. So that's tremendous strength you can gain from something like that. Because this is not from last year, 2 years ago. This is close to 4,000 years ago. Let me continue reading. Abraham says to God now, "How can I really know that it will be mine?" Referring to most likely the promised land that God had promised him. And all these blessings. And God responds, "Bring me," and he tells him, "Let's make a covenant. A bris in Hebrew, a covenant." He tells him to bring different animals to bring as an offering. And in those days, that was the way you made an agreement. You walked through 2 halves of a calf. Then it says the birds, he says, vultures descended on the carcasses, but Abraham drove them away. Seemingly to hint to vultures that there were always these enemies lurking. But then listen, as the sun was setting, a deep sleep fell upon Abraham, and a deep, dark dread fell upon him. And God says to Abraham, "Know for sure that your descendants will be foreigners in a land that is not theirs for 400 years. They'll be enslaved and oppressed," referring to the Egyptian slavery and genocide. "But I will finally bring judgment against the nation who enslaves them, and they will then leave with great wealth, your descendants." And then finally, the sun set, and it became very dark. So you can imagine he's referring to not just physical darkness. A smoking furnace and a flaming torch passed between the halves of the animals. On that day, God made a covenant with Abraham, saying, "To your seed I have given this land, the land of Israel, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates." What is this great dread that it says that Abraham fell asleep, a deep sleep, and then it says a deep dark dread? What is the deep dark dread? So we're told Abraham was shown generations to come. He was shown the major empires, the future great empires, the Babylonian, the Persian, the Greek, the Roman, and the Ishmaelite empires, Arab empires, that would dominate, that would rule, and persecute Abraham's children, the Jews, each other as well. And who would prevail? So Abraham shuddered, a dark dread. He saw what his children would go through. I'm reading this and I'm saying, October 7th, 2023, and so many other incidents. And this is in some way the pitting of Ishmael and Isaac, who are born afterwards. Both were sons of Abraham. Abraham taught love. Pray for infidels. Even those you disagree with, even people you consider to be anti-God. Where's that message? How did an ideology get so distorted and so obscene that you kill anyone you think that is not worshiping the God that you believe in? And in such barbaric ways. So there's many reasons Abraham had a dark dread. He dreaded what he saw coming. A deep, dark dread. But the end of the story, that we shall prevail. The light will shine through, because remember, Abraham represented light. Chesed, kindness, love. And even his grandchildren, the Ishmaelites, the Arab Muslim world, will ultimately embrace it as well, just as the Christians who persecuted the Jews and persecuted the world for years and years, for thousands of years, will be tamed. I'm not minimizing at all the pain and the suffering we're going through right now. All those shattered hearts, shattered souls, families, children, But it's important to know there's a bigger picture. And yes, even Abraham had a dark dread, and so do we. But that's not the end of the story. The end of the story is that this promised land will be yours. And your children will be as multiple like the stars, and they will survive and they will thrive. That's the message from the spiritual front. And this Torah that traveled with us through history is testifying to it. This Bible, that remains the best-selling book in all of history. Even till this day, it sells more books than all the books on the bestseller lists, to the point they don't even recognize it. It's its own irony. So all you have to do is turn to the book, and someone will say, who are the occupiers of this land? The land was given to Abraham, to the Jewish people. Other parts of the world were given to the other nations. Plenty to go around. A little sliver the size of New Jersey was given to the Jewish people. Promised land, that's why it's called the Promised Land. And forever we've been praying, even when we were displaced and went into exile. We never forgot Jerusalem, we never forgot Israel. And the last 75 years, 100 years, Jews began returning to their homeland. I find it like ludicrous. I wish it was only ludicrous, even worse, tragic, that people buy into some false narrative that the Jews are the occupiers. Yes, they were displaced. They were thrown out of their homes. They're coming back home. That doesn't mean that we should hurt anybody else. But don't you understand that? But that's another discussion, which I have done other videos, how people can have such distortions. We are lovers of peace. We are lovers of life and light and love. And that will be stronger than any darkness. That was what Abraham took from the words of God to him 3,800 years ago, in that dark night when the sun was setting and the vultures were descending. And that's what gave him the strength that we would forge ahead, and he would pass this on to his seed, to Isaac, to Jacob, to the Jews that ended up in Egypt, and then continued marching forward, bringing civilization and bringing these eternal values. Instead of a pagan, selfish world, a world of giving, of service, of compassion, of kindness, of love, of gratitude, a world that serves a higher purpose than its own interests, a world where religion is not used and corrupted, but it's used to bring out the best in who we are as humans, to live up to the divine image in which we were created. And even when there's a disagreement, you never personalize or demonize any individual. And the end story will be that this will prevail. Prevail for 3,800 years, the dream, and it will ultimately prevail. So there, my friends, is my update from the spiritual front as we begin the third week. May God bless you, God bless everyone, every innocent man, woman, and child to be protected. May we finally completely eradicate all the pain and the suffering and hopefully transform it. Do what we have to do on the ground, but also do what we have to do on the spiritual front. Let us join together and demonstrate that our war for good and light is stronger than anyone's war for darkness and death. God bless you, and God bless all people. On this earth, may we merit personal and global peace and personal and global redemption. For more on this topic and any other, please, we've created a special landing page on our website, meaningfullife.com/war in Israel. We have a WhatsApp group, a YouTube channel. Please subscribe, please share. Love to hear your feedback and thoughts. We've added a wall, a mitzvah wall of goodness, where you can post any good deed that you take upon yourself. Together, our unity, our synergy can overcome everything. We will prevail. Thank you and be blessed.